The lesson plan I chose to evaluate is a period of the U.S. history under the Cold War. Specifically, it is about President Truman's attitude towards General MacArthur. Truman fired MacArthur after the general went against his policies and tried to instigate the public to invade China. As we can see, the central historical question in this lesson plan, students are required to explore how Americans react to Truman's decision to fire General MacArthur. Let's start off the comments by first looking at the prepared materials for this lesson. The Korean War map used in the introduction part can serve as a perfect supplementary material that provides students with visual indication through pointing and explaining different roads of the war on the map for them. In addition to the contextualization, the implementation of the grounding strategy here can also promote learners' engagement and thus further facilitates the meaning-focused input. Through seeing different places on the map, students can connect the meaning to the spoken form provided by the teacher. As for the copies of Truman and MacArthur's document A to C, I like the sequence of how the materials are handed out. Let's take a look at the document A. Is a tabulation of Americans' attitudes toward the president firing the general. We can see the number of pro was increasing over time, while on the other hand, the number of con was decreasing, and the number of pro finally outnumbered the con on May 7th. Now let's take a look at the discussed questions related to the document. The first one is what does this say about how the American public felt about Truman's decision to fire MacArthur? Yeah, um, the first one is here, and the I actually think this question is kind of overlapped with the second question. Did more people support or oppose Truman? How did this change over time? Basically, these two questions are trying to generate the same answers from the students, but the second one asks in a more specific and straightforward way. In order to answer them correctly, the key language point here should be the comprehension of the word pro and con in the tabulation. If students get the two words meaning backwards, then there's no way they can answer the questions correctly. Another thing draws me attention at the stage 3 is that the discussion is intended to be set up as a whole class, but the truth is, in a mixed level class, students with lower language proficiency tend to struggle with coming up with an answer within limited time. Also, students' personalities vary in different ways. In other words, this whole class discussion doesn't ensure enough opportunities for students at a lower proficiency level or with a shy personality to participate in. Oftentimes, questions faced to all learners are answered by higher proficiency level ones. unless the teacher calls on someone. Considering that since the questions are basically asking the same thing in different ways, I see this a great chance of conducting a differentiated activity. I suggest the teacher dividing students into groups, letting more advanced students work on the first question and less proficient ones on the second. The document B and C are assigned at stage 4. We can see these two letters representing two opposite altitudes of Truman's decision. That's also why I like the distribution sequence. Students are exposed to the tasks in an easy to hard pattern, from dealing with numbers and phrases to understanding sentences and paragraphs. As for the graphic organizer, the three questions are also asked in an increasing difficulty order. The scope of the language that requires learners to produce changes from the name and time, yes or no questions to short answers, which examine their ability to summarize and refine the key information and shifts their attention to the main idea of each letter. Apart from these three questions, there is a written task at the end of the graphic worksheet. It not only assesses students' grammar and syntax knowledge, but also leaves room for developing their critical thinking skill. Also, because this is a group activity, it creates abundant opportunities for learners to discuss the text and negotiate an answer. Um, so let's come back to the second part of the lesson plan, which is the plan of constructions. And the first part is that the teacher presents the project map of Korean War and a lecture on General MacArthur in the Korean War. Um, Here we can see that the teacher present a map in front of the class, but we don't know whether there is any worksheet or handout to be given to the students. So I suggest that here the teachers should provide students with map and worksheets with bullet points so that learners can see the written text and listen to the teacher's instructions simultaneously. This is called the sound symbol correspondence. And in that way, the sound symbol correspondence skill of the learner can be reinforced. Um, and we should pay attention to the tense of the context. And as we can see in the first part of the lesson, the handout is described in the past tense, but in the second half of the lesson plan, it changes into the simple tense, present tense. So we should pay attention to the shift of the tense, and we should let students know that we use different tense because they describe accidents in different time periods. As to the warm-up activity, I think the warm-up discussion should be set into groups because in that way everyone can contribute to the discussion, and it is the reason is as same as the discussion questions in this third stage, because in a mixed level class, if we only conduct whole class instruction, so the questions would be answered by the students with higher proficiency level. So a group discussion will encourage each one to contribute to the engagement. As to the groups with lower levels, teachers should monitor and facilitate the group work in case of students encounter any difficulties, especially in this stage. Um, in this chart, students are required to um, put down information about the document B and document C and give their reasoning, give their decision making in this stage. So it's quite demanding for students of lower levels. So teachers should give helps and give supports in this stage so that students can complete this chart. And in terms of the questions of this lesson plan, from the very beginning, the warm-up decision questions and the questions about the handout, also the questions of the briefing stage and the questions in the wrap-up stage. I think the questions should be printed out and given to students so that they will have a clear view of how these questions are presented, and they can discuss them in groups. In that way, students can engage more in the class and they can think deeper in that way. So if students are asked to discuss questions in groups, they can do the turn and talk, they can think, they can pair up with their partners, and they can share information with their classmates. And also, when teachers are giving instructions, they should make sure that they don't keep the instruction too long so that students will feel bored or they will be distracted. They should chunk the instructions into short parts and pay attention to the time management, because in group discussion, some groups will keep the discussion in the limited time, but the other groups they may take too long to discuss one question. So the teacher should use the timer to make sure that the whole class is in charge of is in the charge of the teacher. And yeah, and I think the whole class feedback is recommended after each group discussion, and the teacher should use the IRF mode to interact with students, giving them substantiate feedback so that students will be motivated and inspired to think about the questions in a deeper way.